G'day everyone, and welcome to our latest iteration of the SPA Takeaways. We're delighted to have you with us. I think there's a bit of update on what's happening, which we will get to in our conversation as well, with legislation that we think is passing or should be passing today regarding the various job keeper package. I'm not overly optimistic that the industry will be covered properly in that package. So that's something we can explore in the conversation. But rest assured, we will be arguing to include in guidelines or other explanatory points that are made around the legislation a way of capturing the arts and cultural and screen industries as part of the overall measures that are being done, and of course arguing for some sector-specific information. Starting with a reasonably forthright exercise, given that the Parliament is sitting, or parts of the Parliament are sitting. I think it's not a full Parliament. Just the only other piece of update before we get started is that tomorrow Carolyn Pitcher was to join us, and instead we've got Elizabeth Trotman from E1. So that'll be great. So please be ready to join us as part of that conversation. Okay, over to our special guest, Ben Law. So good to see you. It's always a pleasure to actually look at someone in their own home environment as opposed to corporate space and share a bit of that with us. So you're standing up, by the look of it. Are you in your office?
Yeah, this is my home office. I mean, a lot of us work from home already, so I guess that's one thing that hasn't changed for me.
Yeah, bonus. And I don't know, you're standing up as well. You use a stand-up desk.
Yeah, how can you tell? Yeah, I am standing. So this is like an old kitchen bench that's just beaten up and is now my standing desk. So yeah, I'm very virtuous. I'm just doing it to virtue signal.
No, it's actually quite good because for some reason I'm thinking, well, not for some reason, but I know that people are sort of interested in sharing the particulars for people that do work at home and now are all of a sudden having to work from home. Routines, patterns of work, the best way to make sure they don't go crazy, bit of self-motivation. And as you say, you've been doing it for a long time. So look, first up, how are you? How is this affecting you, full stop? But also, do you want to share any sort of processes and tips that you do as a general exercise of working from home with everyone?
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess I've mastered working from home because I've only kind of really done that my entire working life mostly, like unless I'm in a writer's room or in meetings or things like that. I think one of the things that I found really helps me is making sure that I have my schedule like down to the last minute for the day ahead, because I think one of the biggest challenges about working from home is making sure that that your day actually has some sort of structure. And of course, if you've got kids, if you've got people that you care for, that structure will probably become unraveled at some stage. But I need to know or have a map of what I'm doing when. I even schedule my lunch breaks and stuff like that. I schedule exercise because with the line of work that we do, there's always something more to do. There's always an email to respond to. Yes. And if I see, well, actually, you do need to break for lunch now, you kind of become your own boss in that way. Schedule leisure and all those things around it.
So you're the complete opposite of the writers that sometimes you speak to that can't do anything during the day, but effectively work at 3 in the morning through to 7 in the morning, and then sleep during the day and have this completely unstructured creative process. But you don't. You sound like you're a very, maybe this is stereotyping in some ways, but it's discipline, and it's sort of 9 to 5, or is it 8 to 7 or something in terms of your working day?
I've kind of got that migrant background discipline in me. I think there's also a part of me that would very easily become that person you're describing. I'm usually a night owl. When I was a kid, we'd go on school holidays, we'd go to bed at like 1 a.m. and wake up in the afternoon sometimes, like I am kind of that person on a cellular level, but knowing that I need to create structures and parameters around. Exactly. And so for me, like I basically am 9 to 5. I get all my emails out over breakfast before 9 a.m., hit the ground running with the tasks at hand from 9, call it a day at 5 p.m. And it's like, if everyone else is doing it, that's reasonable for me, unless there's some insane deadline.
I love this, and I promise we won't just spend all of this chat talking about your personal situation. But
No,
I am,
you're
I love it.
allowed.
I'm also interested in whether it's being disrupted by the fact that your partner's now working at home and how much he's used to this experience and how much it's interrupting your discipline now.
Well, we're lucky because, when we moved to Sydney, which was about 5 or 6 years ago now, that was the first time we ever had a separate office for me. So for the first time, I actually had a room where I could just do my work and close the door. Prior to that, it was the living room where I set up my desk, and that wasn't ideal because that's also a living area. And so I've always been fortunate that I can, quarantine myself anyway before quarantine to have my own space. That's been hugely helpful with my partner now working from home. He's set up shop in the living room / dining room. And so we do have, a door that we can close between us if needed.
Okay, so let's talk about how your work's being disrupted at the moment and what you might have had in train that you're no longer able to progress with, and how you're approaching the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Because I think this is, from all signals from government and the agencies, this is going to be a boom time for writing, potentially, but it's maybe not quite as straightforward as that, and you can't just sort of manufacture great writing. So how are you approaching the circumstances you're in?
So I'm probably one of the luckier ones in terms of like the misfortune that's befallen me personally. It's not too great. The annoyances or inconveniences have been the play that I wrote for Melbourne Theatre Company had to close about 10 days early. So, I mean, that's unfortunate that a lot of people missed out. It was called Torch the Place. It was the first play that I've written for Melbourne Theatre Company, and it was sold out, so that was great, but it also meant that a lot of people didn't get to see, those final shows. But at least it got to stage because, all the major theatre companies have had to cancel, roughly at least half a dozen shows in events that have never even made it onto stage.
It's heart-wrenching, isn't it? Because when those, I don't know if the schedules for plays are going to be disrupted forevermore. Just of the 10 days you missed out on, how much did you get airtime effectively? How many days did you get on stage?
Yeah, look, we had like a season that I think was roughly 2 months. Like it was quite a decent season. Right. So we got like most of it done. Like 90% of our season was in the bag. Whereas, I know a lot of playwrights and a lot of actors who just were about to go on stage and just didn't at all. The other thing is I've been a part of a writing team for a show that was supposed to go into pre-production. It meant that we had a little bit more time to develop the scripts, which is always helpful, but it's meant that nothing more can happen beyond that. There was another show that we were starting to develop in a writer's room. We just had to push the brakes on that, but we might be reassembling soon to do that virtually, which is great, and it's quite nice because the themes that we're dealing with dovetail with the moment in which we find ourselves. Timely in that way. And look, in terms of my other work, I'm lucky in that I'm a broadcaster and I do a weekly back page for Good Weekend magazine. Good Weekend, unlike a lot of other weekend magazines, is still going. But the biggest kind of income slash for me has probably been public speaking work, speaking at conferences, emceeing things. That's not a possibility anymore. That's quite a substantial chunk of my work. And so that's been slashed and burned very, very quickly.
Has there been any demand? I'm interested in how a corporate landscape's adapting in this situation, because I have a friend who runs events for an infrastructure sort of group, and they've been moving to an online Zoom environment where the guest speakers are still doing the lunch. They've in fact sent out, I think, Uber Eats vouchers to everyone participating, so they get this sense of community. I know. So you're having this virtual corporate lunch, and I'm wondering if there's, maybe this is too early, but there is maybe an opportunity there to keep it won't be probably as fulsome as it was, but to keep some sort of income stream going in that space.
Yeah, hopefully. And I think like some festivals, like writers' festivals, I saw the Newcastle Writers' Festival successfully migrated its entire program online to either whatever it was, YouTube, Facebook or Zoom. Zoom is so handy for some formats, but not maybe for a large-scale crowd where everyone's suddenly trying to figure out whether they're muted or not. But I think festivals are trying to migrate over there, but for some it's just really not not possible.
Can I just check with you about your own fear of an overload of coronavirus related scripts
Yeah.
and sort of circumstances that we're now going to receive in the creative industries in about, I don't know, a few months, 6 months' time, and whether you're actually resisting the idea of, given it's a global issue, it's not even something that is unique to your personal experiences. Is there a pull to kind of engage with it, or actually, we just can't go there because it's going to be too much?
I think it really depends. I mean, one of the jokes that I've been making with my friends in theatre is, I can't wait to see you on the other side of this, going to all the terrible, terrible plays that are going to come out of being inspired by this plague. I think for me personally, with the projects I'm working with, it's less of a question of whether we're suddenly going to be working on a coronavirus inspired type thing. And there have been some projects that I've heard other friends developing or pitching that are actually really great. Like, what does this genre with coronavirus look like? And what does this genre, unexpected genre, with coronavirus look like? And there have just been so many innovative takes, so I look forward to them.
Yes.
On the other hand, there are some projects that I was developing that are set in the contemporary world, and now the question is very strongly, well, is this story set before or after coronavirus now? Because I think a lot of the shows that we see, it's kind of like when you introduce technology into a storyline. Technology is superseded very quickly. It dates a show very quickly. So how does this world that you're creating, whether coronavirus impacts it or not, does suddenly throw you in or out of a universe very quickly? And I think a lot of producers and story writers are going to be grappling with that.
The BCV, or what is it, after ACBC, before, exactly. That's
totally. It's not Christ anymore, it's coronavirus.
That's right. Well, it is. That's a really important point, because there's a touch point that you can't help but touch on, even if you're actually not engaging with the issue. You've worked with a number of production companies in your past, and you're working with a number at the moment. I'm interested in how, or whether you're getting a guide yet from, in any other field as to how people would also like you to work with them now, or is it a bit too early? I'm sort of even thinking about if they're setting up virtual writers' rooms, or wanting, they've got particular engagement straight away with new ideas, or is it a little bit too early to be talking about this?
Well, for me, the big project that we were working on with Goalpost Pictures, we were just wrapping up the writers' room just as coronavirus was starting to become a major issue in Australia. So it was the right time for us to migrate away from the writers' room anyway, to do our own homework and all of that sort of stuff. I know a few of my friends have already seen their screenshots of Zoom writers' room, so I know that that's definitely happening. And I think a lot of production companies seem to be wanting to develop those ideas. So as soon as the veil of coronavirus is lifted, whenever that might be, you can hit the ground running. We're able to develop, we're able to pitch quite happily. Writers especially, being in isolation is actually quite conducive to good writing for a lot of projects. I'm mentoring someone who's working on their feature film at the moment, and being in lockdown in Canberra, where he is actually quite great for that. And with another project that I'm about to be involved in, we do want to go back into the writer's room to develop it more. And I think that will totally be fine over Zoom. I mean, it's going to be difficult not having the whiteboard, because there's something about the room that is quite tactile. Yes. But I imagine there'll be other things that can still be achieved remotely.
And look, is there some sort of risk that you see? I mean, there's a positive you're touching on, which is that people get some downtime to develop. And there's one of the criticisms sometimes is that, Australian content doesn't get that breath of air to kind of give itself some time to develop as best as it might want to sometimes do, relative to the States, given that there's a pressure to often get into production. And I don't know if you feel that as a creator of shows, that you feel like, actually this is ready, or in fact we would have preferred to have had another period with it, and that might be of value to this circumstance. But but I'm also thinking of the downside of a lot of projects ready to go because they've had maybe a good opportunity for development, but essentially if you're trying to get planes off the runway, there's only so many you can launch at a certain time, and a fear that we're going to be in limbo with a lot of projects. And in fact there could be a development downturn if you've got so many things ready to go, but no way to kind of get them off the air, and you just don't want to keep developing ad infinitum about everything. So have you thought about that problem?
Yeah, I think there are several things that come to mind as you talk about all of that. I mean, the first thing is, we don't live just in a world where it's about Australian money anymore. Like so many of the projects that we're talking about now, that we're working on now, depend on collaboration with other countries. It might be a co-pro, it might be shot in 2 different locations or multiple locations, not just in Australia, but across the world. Like everything is porous and collaborative, even if it is an Australian-made show. And so restrictions are not going to be uniformly lifted around the world. Like we're all going to be at different stages. And I think that's going to be one huge consideration for everyone. Just because things might be more flexible suddenly in Australia, America might be still it currently is far worse than we are now. So that's one thing that comes to mind.
And it could mean we can get some of our shows off earlier if we're able to contain what's going on, and that means we've got a potential opportunity to sort of be outwards quicker than everyone else.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing you mentioned was that opportunity for more development time, and it's true to an extent that now projects have a little bit more breathing space, but to be able to still pay those people to invest the time to develop is still a question of money and economies of scale, and those things don't move. You've only got how much money you have to pay people for the time they have.
And well, that is where I'm wondering if the opportunity exists, because what the agencies so far are sort of signalling to everyone is that we're going to use the money and the resources we have to pivot towards more development, supercharged development, maybe spend more time on certain things. But I think, there's a risk that what that actually might mean, perhaps, and it's not, maybe it's a positive, not necessarily a risk, but it might be about how much you can essentially pre-produce that isn't necessarily the same thing as the traditional development idea, and then what that means for different people. Because I think the government and everyone's conscious of trying to keep people in employment, right? And that is, I mean, we might pivot a little bit to your... part of the reason I reached out, of course, was that you wrote a very good Guardian piece about in the Guardian about the arts and creative industries broadly and what they bring, and the need to recognise this. And I think the reason, of course, you would have written it, and the reason people are very agitated, is they're not seeing a government give a signal yet to a community that is likely to be unemployed for a big chunk of time and not supported yet in terms of what we're seeing in terms of packages. Do you want to talk a bit about that article and what you're observing and your desire to write that in the circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, when I wrote this piece of The Guardian, it was marrying a few different threads and conversations that I was having with other people and conversations I was having with myself, which is, now that we were self-isolated, once we got over that kind of scramble and practical terror of making sure that we had groceries and medical supplies and, of course, toilet paper, the next thing that pretty much all of us were trying to figure out was how to keep sane and entertained in all of this. And it was books, it was Netflix and Stan and all streaming services, it was video games, it was what music people were listening to, it was people going and watching Instagram concerts of their favourite singer-songwriters, and all of that is the arts. And I think so often the public conversation and the political conversation about the arts is divorced from our everyday experience of the arts. Like the arts is all of those things we come home to and look forward to, whereas I think most of the time the top end conversation is arts as this hoity-toity thing that's removed, not a necessity, only a luxury. And even if that is your value system, one of the things I found really kind of jaw-dropping and galling in the conversations about bailouts and investments during coronavirus is that, say you don't even value the arts, say you don't even want to engage with the arts, if you just want to talk about it in pure economic terms, then the numbers do stack up in terms of why you need to support this industry. There are such very strong early conversations about bailing out the airlines, which are going to receive at least $750 million in support from the government, more even pending, whereas there's no conversation about the arts, which contributes far more than what the aviation industry contributes to the Australian economy and bottom line. And it's quite extraordinary that state, territory, and even local government seems to be having a far more robust conversation about supporting the arts during this incredibly crippling period, not just for artists, but for organisations as well, that might be annihilated. We're going to see a lot of loss on the other side of this. So we're going to have to start talking more frankly about money and investment. And I guess that conversation, of course, is happening now in Parliament.
Yes.
Hopefully.
Yeah, and look, I know, I think Albo had a bit of an opportunity to introduce the arts into something he spoke about that I saw as I was jumping from here. I'm not sure where the government is how it's approaching it. I know, our minister set up, I think, and it has been introduced into discussion with I think an arts community group that I shouldn't say community group, but it was the live performance group. It was a community of effectively businesses and others that are in more the live space early on, because that was where the damage was being done. And there is a separate screen sort of working, I wouldn't say working group, it's more an information sharing group that's been set up federally. I think we've seen some movements quickly from certain state governments and others. I think Queensland announced today a $3 million investment from the Screen Queensland agency and a pivot towards development and other support for this sector. Western Australia's already announced something, Tasmania's announced something, but that they're relatively small amounts in terms of the top-ups to what's going on, and really a federal response is critical. And I think it's really interesting what you said there about why that message doesn't quite get through and why people are blocked in receiving that information, because it's certainly the case that groups, others, individuals present lots of great information about, and there's an emotional connection to a lot of things that is happening, but that economic relationship to what we do isn't really understood at all, is it? And I'm not...
No, and the numbers are quite staggering in terms of, I mean, the conversation that we're having today, or trying to have today in Parliament, I guess is also separate to the funding issue, because one of the main conversation being had now is making sure that a whole raft of freelancers and casuals who often work in the arts, but also include a lot of other industries, aren't left out of the job seeker package. And then there's the conversation beyond that, which is the funding for the arts, which was already being slashed before this happened. And now you've got this diabolical timing where Australia Council funding for so many important peak organisations has been wrested from them from these long-term kind of funding programs that they were expecting and relying on. We're not talking about obscure organisations. We're talking about the Sydney Writers' Festival. We're talking about the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney. So the fact that these organisations and its workers, we're talking about like tens of thousands of artists, at least 600,000 people who work within the arts and creative industries in Australia. Like, these are not insignificant numbers, and I'm not sure why their income, their livelihood should be mattered less than any other Australian worker.
Might want to explore two theories that I have about this, and whether or not this is maybe a bit of waste of oxygen in the end. But I've been wondering about whether or not, because the arts, and I put all of us in that same cultural industry, creative industry grouping, is so there's a pool of people, a pool of businesses that's quite large in terms of, but they're small. Often there's a smaller. It's not an aggregated easily, it's not an industry that easily aggregates through Qantas and Virgin, at two very large businesses or brands. And I've noticed over my years of doing this job that it's a very powerful thing when, for example, Thor comes in and it is able to sort of, command, this is the thousands of people that are employed, and this is the economic value, and it's a single project, but yes, it's $200 million. So it captures people's attention, and of course it's got Chris Hemsworth in it, so that's an additional element. But if you talk about family law, it is something that is a smaller project with smaller budgets, a smaller cast and group. So it seems to not, even if that is of course a more culturally relevant piece, possibly with a larger audience, when you add up the television audiences for a show relative to people that may have watched, I don't know, Pirates of the Caribbean or something that received a lot of support, but you don't hear, it's sort of like the scale of it is difficult for people to understand in government, perhaps, that in fact maybe 100 family laws might equal the budget of one of these very large productions, but the impact of what's being done in these smaller productions is actually transcends maybe the impact of one large bigger production. I don't know if it's about the scale of which we're operating.
And even a project like the Family Law, of which we had 3 seasons, this is sold in. That might seem like and it is a smaller scale production, a 6-part comedy on a public broadcaster. That is pretty modest, but this is also a program that sold in over 70 territories worldwide, that employed hundreds and hundreds of people, that invested and injected so much money into the Queensland economy. There's a reason why state and federal governments invest money into the arts, because there is a return.
Yes.
All of these investments is not just blowing money for the sake of it, it's to seek a return. And the arts often and consistently brings back returns. So it feels like there are watertight arguments when you're talking about numbers, when you're talking about metrics. Like, those numbers exist, and the idea that the arts exists independently of the other sectors that we're talking about, people fly for the arts, to be involved in the arts, to work on projects, to actually see arts. Tourism depends on the arts. Hospitality depends on the arts. None of these things exist independently of each other. We're all part of an ecosystem. You remove, or you propose to remove a huge chunk of that, that's going to affect all the other sectors that you're striving to protect too.
I think that interdependence is becoming very obvious in this environment as well, because you're seeing when one thing gets closed down, it affects so many other parts of the economy. And I would hope to think that what we do and the creative industries do, and by all means, I do recognise Family Law is a substantial show, because it absolutely is, and it's returned significant export dollars as a consequence. And in fact, when you think about that impact, but even a very small, quasi-amateur production in a town hall in a regional community that's resurrecting Orphan Annie or something else, is actually putting jobs for people and selling tickets and creating community and doing all these other things. So we're talking about different layers that somehow need to be brought together. I also wonder if partly that creative industries are thought of as play and not necessarily, and because we have access to tools to create ourselves, we've got a pen and paper, everyone knows how to write, everyone understands, they've finger painted as a child, we can shoot a good video and flick it over to someone, in terms of our own, whether there's a lack of understanding perhaps sometimes about the range of, you want everyone to participate in creative industries, but the kind of professional end of that creative industries is incredibly disciplined, skilled and highly trained, and expensive actually to deliver. So that compendium maybe because it's not the case that you play occasionally by flying the odd Boeing 747. It's not that there's other industries that let you in the door as much as the creative industries do, and we do as a process. We want people to engage, but maybe that's also a negative to people where they think, it's not as highly disciplined perhaps, or as rational.
But like you say, there's a reason why it's called the creative industries. Like, it is a disciplined industry with specialist workers who have studied hard to get these skill sets. And even beyond those kinds of arguments, those economic rationalist arguments, like sports, the arts is a nation-building exercise. It's about the brand that we export to the rest of the world. And I think it says something about Australia that our most recognisable built structure is a home for the arts. Very few other nations have that claim to fame, and we do. We are known for our arts around the world.
We're in furious agreement, I should say, and if we're in a furious disagreement, it might make for better viewing. Perhaps we should have a false argument. We have to wrap in a minute, but I'm interested in, you'd be a great consumer of what's going on. Is there anything that's really drawn your attention in terms of amusing thing that you've seen that people are doing, or a really emotional thing that how people are coping in the environment in which they're operating? I'm springing this upon you, but is there some video or little meme or something that you've picked up that you've gone, that is actually very clever?
Look, I think, as much as social media is a constant hellscape for all of us who inhabit it, I think it's also kind of the funnel of joy too in pretty dark times, and people laughing in the dark with gallows humour is quite soothing. There's been that TikTok guy, Jeff Vandersan, who's just taken off online with his TikToks, often of coronavirus related stuff. You know, his coronavirus lip sync to Scott Morrison's press conference where he was shutting down Andrew Probyn while turning to Catherine Murphy. Like, that is just this strange, surreal fever dream thing that I can't stop watching. So he's been terrific. The Kates, as in Kate McCartney and Kate McLennan, and their very surreal Twitter press conference about what is and what isn't allowed in self-isolation, because the rules have kept changing and they've just taken it to this strange, bizarre, completely confusing, discombobulating level that just left me helpless. And then those two things came, you know, married with each other when Jeff Anderson started lip syncing the Kates on his TikTok and Instagram account. So, you know, like stuff like that.
Great.
Keeping us very happy.
All right. Look, I do wish you all the best for this period. Hopefully we have maybe a chance to talk again and hear what else we've discovered in the next, because it sounds like we're going to be in this situation for quite a while. I do want to make sure before I go is just to signal, yes, the government is looking at the legislation. We've deliberately not put out any information sheets about what the rumours of things have been and the pre-releases of things until we actually know what the government's likely to do. The critical thing we think is that it depends on the sort of accompanying notes that is given to the Treasury Department and the tax office as to how certain people will be treated. And I think we're all at the moment focused around JobKeeper and whether people effectively employed across the whole of our industries, because it's a gig to gig economy, don't necessarily fit into the current, I think, the thinking. So the degree to which that is expanded or allowed or exemptions are made in certain ways, that will be critical. And you know, I think for the broader campaigning will be something very sector specific, but also I think in the sequence of work. I'm just checking why there's no message from me that I have to feed to you, that we need to kind of resurrect, I suppose, a specific industry package like the airline industry has, if in fact most of our workforce is not captured by these measures. So look, Ben, thank you. It's a combination of great information, a good chat, a good little bit of a laugh, and I love seeing your face. So this is one of my great pleasures, being able to engage with a few people like this. So thank you very much. I'll just say goodbye to everyone. Tomorrow I made a bit of a flub. Elizabeth Trotman's with Studio Canal, and she is joining us tomorrow to talk about distribution and the challenges there. So join us tomorrow at the same time, 1 o'clock. And in the meantime, look after yourselves and look after each other.